What's going on, guys? You are officially tuned in into the Faithful Servant podcast, where we discuss topics to challenge your thoughts, perspectives, and ultimately the way you live your life. I'm your host for today, Brother Obadiah, and man, I'm so glad to be back on this podcast. I have a very brief message for you guys today about the power in submission. The power in submission. So when we think about that concept of submission, submitting to one, or in this case, submitting to God, is relinquishing any and all of your ulterior motives, any of your own agenda. Submitting to God is saying, God, I have things in my life that I want to do, but guess what? I'm gonna allow your will to override my will. And I want to discuss this message because this is what I've been thinking about a lot lately. And I think that the big reason why a lot of us aren't seeing, including myself, aren't seeing the kinds of blessings and the kind of things that we want God to we're not seeing God move in our life or in our favor to what we want him to. And it's because we're not submitting. We're not fully submitting. We may be partially giving certain things up, but the Bible in 1 Corinthians tells us that we don't have a life, that our life is not of our own. And I think that when we can come to terms with that and actually accept that the life that we have here should be lived for God. Paul himself said, to die for me is Christ, or to live for me is Christ. In other words, whether I'm living or I'm dying, I'm going to do this for Christ. And Paul is the chief example that we want to take a look at in the Bible, because most of us may or may not know, but before Paul became who he is to us today, a chief apostle, a person who labors for God, for Christ, before he was that, he was actually persecuting the church. Paul at one point in time was not a believer. He didn't believe in Christ. He denied Christ. And in fact, like I said earlier, he was persecuting anybody who believed in Christ. But guess what? Today, we look at Paul who he is today. And Paul is able to become who he was today because in Philippians chapter 3, he tells us that he forgets those things which are behind and he pushes forward towards the mark. So again, guys, the message for today is submission. To really think about, are you submitting to God? Ask yourself that question. In Matthew 16:24, the Bible tells us that we have to deny ourselves. The Bible tells us that when we lose our life here, we will find life when Christ comes. And to lose your life doesn't have to literally mean dying, but to lose your life is saying, I know I have things that I want to do, but I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to allow God to work in my life. I'm going to allow God to actually use me. And something else I've been thinking about when it comes to God using you, like I ask myself, like, man, Obadiah, why do you expect God to use you if you're not letting him use you? We have to allow God to use us. We have to allow ourselves to submit to God. We have to allow ourselves to fully submit. Think about getting into a car. When you get into a car and you're in the passenger seat, you are fully submitted to the driver. Your life is literally in the hands of the driver. You are not in control. Wherever the driver goes, you will go. Wherever the driver backs up, you're going to back up with the car along as well. If the driver chooses to speed forward, you're going to speed forward. You are subject to the will of the driver. And we have to allow God to be our driver. Too many of us are still holding on to the steering wheel, myself included. I have to let go of that steering wheel. I have to let go of the gear shift. I have to let go of anything and everything that gives my life control and say, God, use me as you will. That's how we see men like Paul, James, Peter, Epaphroditus, many of these men in the scriptures who was able to, go so far and truly break spiritual barriers. It's because they were able and willing to submit to God. Submission is so powerful because that's when you truly begin to experience God's power. because we're allowing him to work through us. We're allowing him to use us. So again, this is a message. This is something that I've been meditating on for some time now, and I thought it was just the right time to finally bring this out and to share this with you guys. So as I'm working and on my journey to fully submitting to God, to letting go of anything, and before I close out, this doesn't mean that we can't have a life of our own. This doesn't mean that we can't do things that we may personally enjoy. But what it means is we're not going to allow the things that we personally enjoy to get in the way of what truly matters. We're not going to allow our own personal goals to get in the way of what truly matters, of the work that God has set for us to do. So in closing, there's power in submission. So as I'm on my journey to submit, I urge every one of you who's on this walk to learn to submit as well. And with that, that's all the message for today. Stay safe, guys.